How do conversations about race normally go? I asked this question during a diversity club that I ran at a school a few years ago. The room was full of high school students with varying race and gender affiliations, and their answers, as I'm sure for many of you, were not surprising to me. Not well at all. Standing there, in only my second year of teaching English, I was terrified. This is going to be a disaster. I'm going to be fired for having this club. But these young people were here, and they wanted to talk. I had to find a way to figure out how to make this conversation different. Conversations about race are awkward. They bring up powerful, uncomfortable emotions like anger, defensiveness, anxiety, helplessness, guilt, blame, invalidation, and fear. They very seldom reach any kind of resolution or understanding. My students and I spent some time talking about this. Why is it so hard? I decided I needed to go and do some homework, and I read the works of some incredible race theorists who had been there all along. Robin DiAngelo, Daryl Wing-Sue, and Layla F. Saad. Much of what I'm sharing with you here today is a direct result of their teachings. What I read and what was unfolding in our club began to match up. What I noticed was that many of my white students in the race discussions tended to try to dilute or diminish or change or even end the discussions. Many of my white students told me that they were afraid of saying the wrong thing and looking racist. I watched my white students becoming defensive and angry when they believed that their intentions were being misunderstood, or when something was said that suggested that they were in fact racist. When I challenged them further, some of their responses became borderline abusive. Then on the other hand, my students of color experienced these conversations as unpleasant and harmful. One of my students said that she felt afraid of being seen as ruining the vibe or being seen as stereotypically angry or dangerous for speaking her mind. Another said she felt self-betrayal when she chose not to speak up on a race issue, even when she felt she should. The general responses they got from white students were felt deeply as a denial of their pain and their lived realities. I watched them become angry, frustrated, and hopeless. Despite all this, it was still my students of color who were more open to discussions about race than my white students. Both groups wanted to be in the club. Week after week, they kept showing up, but week after week, the same scenarios played out. So what was getting in the way? I began to notice a few things, first inside of me and then in my white students. I'll share one of those things with you here today. It was the word, racist. As an English teacher, I know the importance of words and I understand the effects that they can have on people. Here was a word with a very specific set of connotations, creating a very specific set of effects. I've been taught that the worst thing to be in post-94 South Africa is a racist. When I thought of racists, I thought of the atrocities committed by the apartheid regime, the KKK, people who say or do overtly hateful things and get exposed online. At the time, I understood a racist to be three things. One, a racist consciously does not like people based on race. Two, they intentionally set out to harm these people as a result. And three, they're an isolated individual or group and not part of a bigger system. If that is my definition of a racist, then any indication that I am connected to this kind of behavior is going to trigger me into feeling like I need to defend my moral character. I don't want to be this kind of person. I'm going to get defensive. I'm going to be insulted. This knee-jerk defensiveness is exactly what I was seeing in our club with my white students. Any indication that they had said or done something racially problematic would set off this response. The more I saw it, the more I started to realize that it was happening everywhere. My friendship groups, my community, and online. But this definition wasn't helping me or my white students to see what my students of color already understood so well. In fact, this definition made it impossible for me and my white students to understand the following important lesson. As white people in South Africa, we've all grown up in a society in which racism is the bedrock. It is inevitable that we will have absorbed racial biases and patterns. It is inevitable that we will have investments in an unequal system that still benefits us today. These racial biases, patterns, and investments are largely unconscious and largely unintentional. It's not our fault that we have them. It's not something we need to feel guilty about. But it is our responsibility to realize them and to dismantle them. This doesn't mean that there aren't people who consciously and intentionally are harmful to people of color. It just means that this definition is too limited, and it prevents us white people from seeing that we do carry unconscious racial biases and patterns, and that we do have investments in a system that was built on racism, which still benefits us today. As soon as I was able to realize this, I stopped being afraid of the word racist. I could stop denying, defending, explaining myself in conversations and get down to the real work of addressing these unconscious biases, patterns, and investments that I inevitably have. I could actually start to hear what people of color were saying and how much I had to learn from them and how much work I needed to do. The people who called me out for problematic racial behavior now became like lighthouses, shining a light on something dangerous that I could otherwise not see in the dark. I started to want to know more, read more, learn more about my unconscious biases, patterns, and investments because I want to dismantle them. The beauty of the unknown is that I do not yet know all the unconscious racial biases, patterns, and investments that I hold. But because I can acknowledge that I inevitably have them, I can see them and I can dismantle them. I can get on board with building a society that is racially equitable and just, where we are able to have productive, intimate, and reciprocal relationships with one another. Thank you.